Alright, y'all, so today I wanted to do a quick review slash thoughts on The Ultimates from Marvel Comics Volume 1. This is a pretty famous comic book in regards to the Marvel history of comics. It really was the big comic that, didn't start the Ultimate comic universe as it will come to be known, but it was one of the major titles that exploded it into popularity. And in general, it was a hugely influential comic book. I mean, it heavily inspired the MCU Avengers film in 2012, alongside other superhero titles in the future. But in this video, I wanted to give you my thoughts on it because it's a very important comic book and it does have a lot of nostalgic and importance to me, so to speak. So yeah, I'm just going to be reviewing Volume 1 here. I'm not going to get into Volume 2 or really Ultimates 2 as of this video, just Volume 1. Which back then, this comic was published all the way back in 2002 to 2004. And it, was obviously written by Mark Millar, artwork by Brian Hitch, alongside some other people. And the Ultimates basically were designed as a sort of modern day reinvention of the Avengers to be a part of the new rebooted universe that would become the Marvel Ultimate Universe, which, if you don't know what that was, it was basically in the early 2000s and really throughout the 2000s, there was a separate Marvel universe that was ongoing with the mainline Marvel universe. And the Ultimate Universe was designed as a counterpart for new readers to jump on, to get these characters, to not have so many years of continuity and backlog issues to understand the current continuity. You could just jump into the Ultimate Universe and totally get these characters and just experience these characters from a fresh, new perspective. So it was very easy for new readers. It also allowed for artists and writers to completely reinvent these characters for, at the time, modern day sensibilities. So like reinvent them for the 2000s, maybe make them a bit more realistic, maybe a bit more edgy, dark, serious, whatever you want to call it. And that was the basic premise of the Ultimate Marvel Universe. The series, or the universe, so to speak, launched with Ultimate Spider-Man, Ultimate X-Men eventually, and now, of course, this universe version of the Avengers, the Ultimates. Now, I have a bit of nostalgia for this team, the Ultimates, just because I didn't necessarily grow up with the Avengers initially. I grew up with the Ultimates. And like I said, as far as I can remember, it was the earliest version of the Avengers I ever saw. And a lot of that is due to the fact there was a great animated film that was released back in 2006 for it, and due to the fact of the popularity of this comic book. And like I said, that's a huge deal to me. So I have a little bit of nostalgia for this. Now, I actually never actually sat down and read Ultimates Volume 1. And I gotta say, I was a bit surprised, especially if you've seen the animated movie, which is based on this comic. There are some pretty big differences, and definitely lives up to the label and the idea of the Ultimate Universe, where everything is more dark and serious. In this, the best describe this comic to someone has never seen it is it's very cinematic, and it's probably the closest thing to a 2000s Avengers movie you could possibly get that wasn't done by Marvel Studios, right? So, like, imagine if Fox or Warner Brothers got their hands on it and they would try to make a realistic, up-to-date, modern version of the team. That's probably what this might have been like. And the comic is very cinematic in its scale, and it has a lot of really good and interesting story beats, but also a lot of really strange and satirical dialogue throughout. I've heard this comic also being described as, it's like The Boys. If you don't know what that is, it's kind of basically a comic that trashes on superheroes and all that. It's a huge commentary on the superhero genre. But this comic is similar to The Boys. It's like The Boys before that Boys comic came out in a lot of ways. Obviously not as graphic and as intense as that comic can get, but it has that same kind of satire throughout the entire comic. And to me, I'm a bit mixed on the satire throughout this. There are some parts of it I think it works. There's some parts are just like, it gets too much and it's too ridiculous. I have to laugh out loud. That being said, kind of go into my pros, my cons, my overall thoughts on this thing. And to kind of give you a really quick rundown on the comic, basically it follows Nick Fury, who, believe it or not, in this comic, was modeled after Samuel L. Jackson. And basically, the MCU version is exactly like this version. And from what I understand, this was the first time this version of Nick Fury ever appeared. So there's a lot of influences from the Ultimates in the Avengers film that we got in 2012. There's a lot of story beats that are similar. But you will definitely notice there are some things that are dialed back from the Ultimates, which I think was probably a good thing. But Nick Fury is trying to put together a team of superpowered people to basically stop any big threats that are going to come into the world. They build some kind of, it's not the Avengers Tower, it's called a Triskelion, which is this kind of giant mini island off the coast of Manhattan. So that's pretty cool. Eventually, the team that makes up the Ultimates is comprised of Hulk / Dr. Banner, which in the Ultimates universe, he's quite different. For one, Hulk is gray here entirely from the beginning, which is obviously a nod to the fact that Hulk was originally gray way back in the early comics before it was like a coloring issue. They had to change him to green. I don't mind this change. He's also a intense monster and weirdly eats people, which I actually don't mind that change, but I know a lot of people have critiqued it. And another big thing, he's just a weirdly horny person, which I don't like that at all. Captain America is similar here. The costume looks pretty much similar to the mainline continuity. Giant Man is kind of this version of Ant-Man. He's Hank Pym, but he's only figured out, he's decided to be Giant Man here, and his costume is like this leather outfit, a bit muted on the colors, and I mean, I think it looks cool, but, that's what the costume is. His wife is the Wasp, and, she has a pretty different outfit from the comics. It's also revealed she's a mutant, which is really interesting. And then we also have Iron Man here, who, looks pretty different. Is similar, but he's different. Like, the suit is a lot more bigger, bulkier. It requires a team to actually get him out of the suit, which is pretty interesting. Also, Thor here is different, and there's kind of this lingering mystery that really won't be resolved until Ultimates 2, that Thor is, he could be a Norse god, or he could be just a crazy guy that escaped an asylum, but he's like a political activist in this comic. He's like hanging out with a bunch of hippies, and he's protesting the government and all this and that. And that's a really interesting take on Thor. So yeah, that's kind of what the main Ultimates team looks like at the beginning of this series in Volume 1. The basic gist of it is, they're kind of, Nick Fury's composing the team together, but they kind of run some issues in the fact that there's not a lot of superhuman villains for them to fight, not big enough threats. And, Bruce Banner, in kind of an effort to galvanize the team to prevent the Ultimates from being shut down, and also kind of despaired against the fact that at the time he couldn't crack Captain America's secret soldier serum, which there's also a subplot in this comic where they find Captain America, they bring him back to the modern day, so to speak, in 2002, and all the psychological stuff that comes with that. Basically, but to kind of go back to the Bruce Banner thing, he turns himself into the Hulk, and all the Ultimates have to come and fight him. Eventually, Thor kind of loosely joins the team, and they successfully stop Bruce Banner / the Hulk, and they lock him up. And it's kind of used as a huge victory for the Ultimates instead of a massive F-up. That's what it is. And the true identity of the Hulk is hidden from the public. And that's kind of the very brief synopsis. For my pros, I think Bryan Hitch's artwork is amazing. He goes for a hyper-realistic style here. All these characters look real. It almost looks like an action movie. It's very cinematic in its look and its approach and its paneling. And it's like I said, for me, it's a beautiful looking comic. I mean, there's some ugly faces here and there and some weird drawing and art mistakes. But for the most part, it's a really great looking comic. I really enjoy how everything looks, and it's on point. And I do like most of the designs as well. I also like a lot of the dialogue Mark Miller uses. It's very witty. It's very charismatic. It draws you in as a reader. It doesn't feel boring. Like I said, the comic plays out like it's an action movie, which I think works in its favor. I also think the Captain America stuff here is handled very well. I thought the whole psychological aspect of it is actually done a bit better than the Avengers movie we got in 2012, which really didn't have any of that stuff. So I thought that it was really cool the comic tackled it a little bit. I also thought, too, Hulk's portrayal here, like I already mentioned, was really, I think, good. I like Hulk here. Maybe it's just like I'm kind of fatigued from the MCU making him Professor Hulk, but I enjoy seeing a really big, raging, savage Hulk here. And the idea of Hulk being this unstoppable threat that all the Avengers have to face, or at least, excuse me, the Ultimates have to face, is a really good idea. I think it's an interesting idea and it's a decent Volume 1 issue. I also like Thor's interpretation here. It's a bit different from the MCU or other versions of Thor you've probably seen, but I think it works quite a lot, and I like this version of it. I also like Iron Man. He seems very much like he still has the whole drinking thing, which is present in a lot of Iron Man comics, but it's really cool, and I like how it's really well done, and he's very witty in how he talks. Hawkeye and Black Widow are introduced later in the series. I'll get to them more in Volume 2, but they're pretty interesting as well when they're eventually introduced. And I really enjoy, like I said before, the cinematic approach of the storytelling here. There's also some really interesting messages about Hank Pym and Giant Man, because there's something that happens at the end of Volume 1 that revolves around the fact that he actually abuses his wife, which was something I think was mentioned in the comics, and it was kind of brought into his character a little bit. But here they take it to the extreme in a very disturbing scene, which he messes up Wasp, and it's just a really crazy kind of thing that happens, and really puts him out of the series, which I'm not sure why that was done. Maybe the writers didn't like Giant Man, but who knows. But yeah, I think that artwork's good. Some of the writing's really good. I like the cinematic approach of the storytelling. There's a lot of really great, iconic stuff in this. There's even a hilarious exchange about who each other would play in an Ultimates movie. Obviously, they name drop Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury. Matthew McConaughey as Giant Man's funny. Johnny Depp as Iron Man is a weird choice, but regardless. Now I'm going to give some of my cons with this comic, because as much as it was instrumental in bringing the Avengers in for the movie side of things and bringing the comics into a more cinematic language, there are some really weird satirical elements in this comic. And I'm not exactly sure if it's Mark Miller just being very satirical with it, and that, look at these, it's a military spec ops unit, the Ultimates, and look how messed up this could possibly be for the world. I'm not exactly sure, or it's just, like I said, some vanity writing here. But I like the satirical elements. I like the fact they point at the little bit of the ridiculousness of a Ultimates team working for the government. But some of the satirical elements, I think, also don't work in its favor. For example, Hulk and Betty. Betty in this comic is a complete asshole to Banner. She's just really weird. She's nonsensical and rude to him all the time. And just in general, when he turns into the Hulk, it just is so bizarre. Like, Hulk says some of the almost outrageous and cringiest things you can ever see in the comic. Like Hulk is, and also, like as I mentioned earlier in the video, he's a weirdly horny monster. And he's like, at first he gets mad at Betty because Betty's apparently on a date with Freddie Prinze Jr., and Hulk tries to stop it, and it implies that, like, oh, I'm gonna, R-word her, which is insane. That's just insane behavior. And there's even a part where it's like, another way they have to stop Hulk is that Wasp has to flash herself to him. And just, I don't know. Like I said, I think it's meant to be funny, but some of the satirical elements, especially Hulk, I don't really enjoy that much. It's funny to laugh at, but I'm just like, they could have actually done this a little bit more seriously, especially since if they're trying to make this a super realistic universe. And, there's some really funny lines here and there. There's some weird satirical elements. Some of it works. Some of it, like the Hulk, I think kind of falls flat on its face. The Hank Pym thing was actually really dark and serious, which wouldn't get really resolved into Volume 2. But, I think some of the satirical elements are hit and miss in the comic. There's some things that work, some things that don't exactly hugely work. You can also say this comic was pretty dated because they name drop a lot of 2000s stuff, but I actually didn't mind it. I think it gave it a very cinematic approach to its storytelling. I think in general for Volume 1, in terms of complaints, I would say there could have been a little bit more maturity in the writing, so to speak. Maybe make the superheroes more genuinely great people. Maybe less satirical stuff, and just in general make a really interesting approach to the Avengers in the 21st century, which I think it does. It succeed at some parts and then succeed at some other parts, but then sometimes the satirical elements and other elements, I think, bring down the comic and its quality. I know a lot of people have been a lot more negative about the Ultimate Comics on YouTube and other channels I've seen, which is, like I said, totally understandable. This is a more dark and edgy version of the Avengers. But, like I said, I didn't mind this for the most part. It was a pretty decent comic book. I enjoy the cinematic language of it, and I enjoy some of the elements of the comic. And I think it's a decent story overall. I would say the Ultimates does get better as a series as it goes along, at least with Ultimates 2 and Volume 2 of Ultimates 1. Like I said before, I do think the beginning of this doesn't get as bad as Ultimates 3, which, if I ever get the chance to read that, yeah, that was a disaster on all fronts. But yeah, that's my thoughts on The Ultimates, Volume 1, written by Mark Millar, artwork done by Brian Hitch and others. And I think, overall, my kind of summary opinion on it, it's a really solid, interesting reimagining of the Avengers in the 2000s. It's really great in its artwork, very cinematic in its storytelling, feels like a action movie brought to life in the comic book, and there's a lot of elements that work. But also some of the satirical and commentary stuff, and maybe that Mark Millar actually doesn't like superheroes at all and is making a subtle commentary of them and kind of like The Boys in terms of style here, works. I think, it's kind of hit and miss with that in terms of the writing. But yeah, that's my overall thoughts on The Ultimates Volume 1 from Marvel, the premier Ultimate / Avengers title in the Ultimate Universe. Alright, hopefully you all have a good day and peace, y'all.